Okay, I can see people. All right. David, you'll be muted by default as everyone is when they come into the meeting. That's quite a stunning effect. Hey, David.
I have also brought a beer to this.
I have brought Schweppes soda water, but it's in incandescent. It kind of looks psychedelic enough that it might be more interesting than it is. Yeah, we had a massive thunderstorm here just then. I'm wondering if it's cloud seeding before the big event tomorrow. So
I like your blue screen thing there.
Yeah, so Zoom does this, but I'm really in front of a white wall or a solid wall. So I can do that in the office, which I'm just waiting for the John C. the office cat to come past mid-meeting. Okay, it looks like we're building up a bit of a crowd, which is good. Yeah. I'll give it a couple more minutes for the crowd to build up, and then I think we can get moving.
This can be the gossip part of the town hall.
Cool.
Any hot gossip, Richard?
No. There's not a lot to report gossip-wise. Except I realize I shouldn't smile because I get Saito Dreamscape tea. So no smiling from me today.
I can deliver on cats. It's very easy. I'll see who I can find. Actually, I should feed them too.
I just saw Mr. DeCourt's demand for felines. Okay, I'll go and get one too. As predicted, this cat is only partially visible.
Great.
So there we go. This is the Cytoplex office cat who was washed away, and we found her in the fence at my house about 5 years ago, but she was tormented by one of my kids. So we brought her to the office where she helps with all sorts of Saito related
This one is Little Pixie. She's the ugliest, but the smallest of the bunch. She doesn't really like us.
She's not ugly. What are you talking about?
What are you kidding? Are you serious?
I like her. She's my kind of cat.
Okay.
All right, welcome to Cats with Saito.
We got a lot more here.
Yeah, we've only got two here.
They've divided the compound up. I was chatting with Andrew. Andrew's the guy that runs the place we're staying. The cats have basically, they got a situation that kind of got out of control, and now the cats have their different territories. One of those territories is our house because we feed them. So
there is a causal relationship. All right, I think it's kind of 3 past the hour, so let's kick into things. First thing I wanted to do was just say welcome to everyone. This is a new thing for us, these community meetings, and something we're really happy to be doing. We love our community. We really appreciate people who take time to get into Saito and to think about what we're doing. And introduce myself, I'm Richard, and with me is David. We're co-founders of the project, and we thought we'd take this opportunity on a regular basis to kind of update the community on where things are at, and we'll do that for about 5 to 10 minutes today. We're not going to labor the point. And I'll cover general project news, and David will cover tech in a bit more detail as that part of the call. And then we'll probably hand over to people who just want to ask us anything about the project, where we're at, etc. We've compiled some questions from the community, and largely I think we'll go over those in the update. But happy to sort of expound on anything people are interested in as we go. So I suppose kicking out from my side, one of the big things to happen in the last month on the marketing side of things is we welcome Shirley Scher to a lead role in marketing and outreach. Shirley comes from both a blockchain project and exchange background and is really helping us ramp up what we're doing in terms of outreach. You can see that with things like this, the start of the ambassador program, which is rolling out, and then hopefully also with just an increased muscle behind our outreach, both to growing the sort of core community, as well as some more activities around branding, et cetera, get our name in front of more people and entice more people to start thinking and listening about what we're saying, and hopefully grow that core community that way as well. We'll also be working heavily, I think, on promoting some of the things we're talking about later on around Web3, et cetera. Something we get asked about a lot at the project is partnerships. And really the big news in that space is something we've been working on for a while. And that is that the first milestone submission for the Web3 Open Grant that we've been given has been submitted and accepted. And what's really cool about that is that classic Saito sort of approach rather than behavior. We didn't want to just build something academic, kind of loosely associated, ideas-based code. We wanted to build something that you can use and touch, and that's something we kind of try and stick to as a project. So that means very soon we'll be able to show you the results of that work, which is quite a bit of interoperability with Polkadot ecosystem tokens, Kusama, and others within the Saito network. And within the arcade specifically is the place you'll be really able to exercise what we've built there. That's really exciting, and also gives us a huge win to go out and get in front of people and show them what Saito is capable of doing. Similarly, and in much the same vein, we've followed on from that with an announcement a lot of you have seen this week with the Elrond group, blockchain and group. And that idea is really very similar, along the same lines as what we've been doing with Polkadot. And the idea there is to work with them to make Elrond assets and tokens first-class citizens in Saito wallets and on the network. And that gives Saito development, that makes Saito development much more approachable and quick for developers in that ecosystem. And I think that's a big part of how we can kind of grow in the ecosystem along with building our own things. Moving on to just sort of general project news. Obviously, we launched on Gate.io, major exchange earlier, or very late last month, early this month. That was huge for us just in terms of community demand and giving people a good, reliable, solid place to access fiat for Saito, and also just the facilities you get on a major exchange. We do have other exchanges and other listings in process, though it's not a core concern now that we have facilities for most people who want to use us. But it's important to sort of keep that moving along. And also positively at the same time, several exchanges, the biggest of which is Dcoin, but also Biloxi and BKEX, all listed us on their own accord in the last month. We like that because it's great for usage and uptake, but we're not creating whales or spending treasury to achieve that for people. And it's, I think, a sign of growing interest in the project. Two other cool things to have happened. One is full integration into Mixin wallet or Mixin wallet and the chat application they have there, which just again gives access to Saito to a really great large community, that we're quite close to. And the last thing is probably a little bit more for the nerds out there. If you're interested, CoinCap.io have integrated Saito into their API. So anyone who wants to get data on Saito trade volume, anything like that, that's now available via their API and their website. And again, that's just more industry integration for the project. But we're constantly trying to move forward on all those small aspects of getting the project in front of people. So that's really a quick wrap up of the kind of major things that we've been doing this last few weeks in general project management. And I think I'll kick over to David now, who's going to talk a bit about where we are with tech, the existing network, and work on a new Rust implementation as well.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to keep this really short. The first thing I'll say is we had a blog post that updated with basically where we are with tech and what's happening last Friday. It has a lot more detail than I'm going to be able to give you guys over Zoom. So I'd say go check it out, read it. I'll answer any questions that people have. We're basically on schedule. I think the big questions we've got is, as you can tell, there's a lot of things that are coming in. And we're trying to figure out basically how to allocate dev time and stuff to tackle them in which order. But yeah, Rust is underway. The scaling stuff is, the numbers, I really like them. We got parallelization in for Merkle root generation for anyone that means anything for today. And Rust is it's the language for us. But I'll tackle questions if people have them. Go read the blog post.
Yeah.
Richard?
Cool. So thanks for that. So I think if people can drop questions either into the chat or just unmute and throw questions at us one at a time. I think we're a reasonable sized group, so we can probably just do them by voice, and that'd be a great way of getting a conversation going. Is there anyone who had any specific questions to ask? I'll dial up the user questions.
Yeah, I had a question, and you can take it either David or Richard. I'm curious. I read through the white paper and the blog post and everything on terms of the scalability element. My curiosity is more with the transactions in a short, finite period of time. Is there any sort of insight as to what the blockchain can achieve on like per second with regards to, I recognize that you're taking a different approach, but I was a little unclear on that element.
You want me to tackle this, Richard?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'd say abstractly, we really don't like transactions per second as a metric. One reason is that everyone plays games with it. What I believe is that every network is essentially under the same constraints. A lot of people, they'll do things like they'll have layer 2 and they'll count those transactions in layer 1. It's fundamentally about how much data you're moving through your network, which is a function of how much the real bottleneck is bandwidth. If we're looking at it from like what are the biggest problems to the smallest problems, the biggest problems are network throughput. And after that, we get down to things like how quickly you can sign transactions, how quickly you can hash data. The advantage of the Saito approach over things like Ethereum is that the data that's a fixed transactions, the core nodes, they only need to hash them. So in terms of the universal constraints that all of these networks face, Saito is going to be up at the top. What that means is that the things that are costing us time, and overwhelmingly, you can see in the tech update, we've kind of given you some numbers. It's loading things into memory. So that's either we're getting it from a disk or we're getting it from another computer on the network. Taking that data and turning it into a computer object we can farm out, that takes time. And then the second big one is really literally going through all of those transactions, hashing the messages, confirming that the SIGs apply. And this is the reason for the rust. Basically, it allows us to farm this out to as many CPUs as we have. So big commercial machines where you've got, you know, a CPU with 64 cores, we can just basically burn through this stuff very quickly. In terms of like the actual numbers, I mean, with the Rust thing, we're looking at processing 300, you know, blocks with 300,000 slips and getting them through in much less than a second. That's not a real world example. I think a lot of the TPS numbers other people give are not real world examples. Like what you'll often see is you'll see people say like, they're assuming the blockchain is running at full capacity, which means that it's like, how many we can do? Well, if we've got 30-second blocks, what if it literally took us 30 seconds to process a block? And then, you know, that kind of stuff isn't realistic. So I give pushback onto this question being useful in a really specific sense, but I think it's a really good question in terms of abstractly, if the question is, how does Saito stand in comparison to scalability? There's nothing standing in our way. The only real difference you've got with Saito versus maybe some permissioned networks is if you have a permissioned network where you only have like 10 people who are licensed to participate, you can take some shortcuts. And you can take some shortcuts because you can do things like round robin, and you don't need the system to necessarily have the bandwidth to account for the fact that the information might come from anywhere. So in terms of public blockchains, we're designed to be, if not the top, right up at the top. In terms of permission networks, I still think that we're actually going to be more competitive for a couple of reasons. One of which is that a lot of these proof of stake systems, they're doing things like using NoSQL databases. Saito, we don't use a database at all. And I think this is actually going to give us a performance edge because at scale, you don't want that kind of software standing between you and consensus. You can see that in things like BSC chain, where already the debate on there, you know, people are saying, let's scale this bigger. And the devs are saying, we can't because we literally have limits on writing stuff to the database. In terms of specific numbers, why don't we give you guys some specific numbers, maybe in about 2 weeks? I could come up with arbitrary, like for benchmark testing, we're generating them all the time, but it's usually in terms of select things like testing various bits, like loading from disk or processing the SIGs in parallel. You know, does that make sense, Wesley?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it absolutely does. And I recognize obviously some of the you know, questions that apply maybe to the existing infrastructures and consensus mechanisms don't necessarily apply with Saito. I'm just trying to obviously wrap my mind around some of these concepts. Obviously, it seems like it's a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of the scalability component, simply because it seems like you guys are obviously emphasizing the data component as the most important element of design, while integrating the economics. And if you could touch on the economic component and differentiate that model, say from meta transactions, because it well, sounds as some of the—
What do you mean when you say meta transaction?
Yeah, so meta transaction is sort of this concept that you know, certain networks have utilized as a way of using a relayer to pay for those transactions that are going on the network from the application that are being built on it. So your idea or conceptual model, your economic model, sort of has the application and developers paying sort of the fees, the transactions, so that the end user doesn't necessarily pay them. And it's in other networks they use a relayer for this concept. And so when I was looking at the visual that Saito sort of put together, try to understand the difference between that economic model and sort of how meta transactions are utilized on some of these networks, where apps and developers can use this relayer account to, instead of having someone to have cryptocurrency to pay for a transaction on the network, it goes directly to the account. So they essentially are subsidizing that cost as a developer, an application being built on the network. So when I looked at the model, it almost seemed as if it was similar to that, but yeah, at the same time, I couldn't necessarily differentiate it. Can you explain a little bit more in detail that economic, sort of the difference of the economic model versus the staking, secure model that is used on other blockchains?
I can take this again if you want, Richard.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, I'd say there's kind of a couple of issues that are getting that I would kind of tease out. You opened the question by talking about scale, and let me just pull back maybe to some early tests we did. A lot of the times, if you're looking at the scalability numbers that people are throwing at you, they'll do things like they'll say, okay, so we've got a server running on Amazon in the US, and we've got a server running on DigitalOcean in Europe. And the scalability numbers are, given that kind of infrastructure, what can we do? And right now, I think, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're limited to about 25 megabits per second.
Yeah, that's the out of the box speeds, yeah.
So like if you are setting up infrastructure, you're limited to about 3 megabytes per second, something like that. And you've got to handle all of your connections through that if you're dealing with those kind of VPS commodity infrastructure accounts. If you're on a network that doesn't pay for infrastructure, you're trapped with those kind of pressures because people don't want the infrastructure to become too expensive. With Saito, if you're running that infrastructure, you're getting paid, and so there's no reason not to upgrade. So if we're talking about scalability of the network component, it's kind of the easy answer, which is say, look, I mean, we're paying for it, so we're expecting that people will have the money to upgrade, and we're expecting that they're going to want to upgrade, because if they upgrade, they can process more transactions and make more money. So it's kind of like a business on-ramp where you can kind of start small and then you can grow, because the growth in providing services gives you more income to grow. So you can like start as a relay node and make money just relaying transactions. And then those profits, maybe you start relaying more and eventually you grow into a block producer. So that's maybe the first question on scalability. I think the second question was really about why would you want Saito instead of a proof of work or proof of stake network, where the nodes that sit between the blockchain and users start playing games with fee flow. And the answer I'd offer for that is take a look at the original Bitcoin white paper and take a look at section 5. A lot of people these days, they don't even read the white paper. Satoshi gives us a list of the things that you need to do in the network. And the first thing he says is fascinating because it's written in the passive voice. Everything else, he tells you exactly who's doing it. But step 1, he says, all transactions are distributed to all nodes. And then step 2 is that, you're going to start hashing in this stuff. And if we're dealing with the proof of work and the proof of stake model, and we start getting transaction relays, transaction processing, we're getting rid of this step. And so the question is, well, do we need this step? And a lot of people will say, oh no, we don't need this step, it's the same thing. If you get rid of that step though, what you're getting rid of is you're getting rid of the openness in the network for everyone to participate on equal economic terms, which means that the relay nodes that are standing on the edge of the network, they've got to be selling the same thing. And in proof of work and proof of stake, that stops happening, because if you're making money from the flow of transactions, you can't share those transactions with everyone. And so you get a bunch of dynamics that changes the economics of proof of work and proof of stake. Basically, one CPU, one vote. People are voting on who gets the money from the transactions. That property stops applying. And we get things like, we get monopoly economics emerging. Things, a lot of it is, the people that are really good at collecting transactions, well, they start steamrolling the network. We can see this in BSV, for instance. BSV is one of the bigger proof of work networks. I think Tau mining has grown to control about 65% of transaction inflows, and they're not sharing. So that's that's going to be a monopoly. If it isn't already, it's more than a 50% attack.
I think a good way to put that as well is, from a user perspective, why are you interested in the blockchain behind the person handling those meta transactions for you? Because what's your relationship to them? Well, you're paying them in fiat or some kind of cryptocurrency the same way you pay for web services now, and you have the same ability to control where your fees go and where your transactions send and how they're handled that you do right now when you send a Gmail message. So I think it's a way of using web. What you're talking about there is a way of using Web 2 technologies to distribute things on blockchains to users, but not something that you would call Web 3 or a genuine blockchain experience for the users, where, for instance, they can take their wallet and go elsewhere. Well, because they're not in possession of it.
It means, you can go anywhere to get the services on the blockchain. I mean, theoretically in Saito, you could say, I'm going to sit on an edge node. I'm going to collect payment in USD instead of Saito. And I myself am going to spend the tokens to make the blocks. In proof of work and proof of stake networks, you don't even need to have the tokens to spend to make blocks. So the difference I stress for that is not scalability. It's about openness and it's the economics. One big thing to realize is a lot of people in proof of work are in denial about this. They assume that if they're building a decentralized system, it's going to stay decentralized. The reality is, if there's like 20 miners out there and they're not sharing transactions, who am I incentivized to do business with? I'm incentivized to do business with the biggest miner. Everyone is, because they're going to be producing the blocks as quickly as possible. And the smaller miners will not be able to compete. People are creating these systems with monopoly economic pressures, and they're saying it's okay because we're starting from a technically decentralized and distributed world. I don't know if that's
absolutely. It makes total sense. I mean, it's fascinating that the reason I got, onto the project was simply Elron. I've sort of done a lot of analysis on the space in general, and my biggest gripe about Bitcoin and some of the other proof of stake models was economics, and the eventual lead towards centralization. The monopoly, it simply, encourages, hoarding of whatever portion of the network, which is sort of I guess you could say bottlenecked from an economic standpoint. All the resources are pooled in that particular area, so it doesn't allow for fairness of all participants on the network, and thus you move back into the same model you were trying to go away from, in a different capacity. I guess I had recently done a published report on the Elron network, and part of the whole aspect was their sort of economic model is very, very unique, as well. And I'm trying to sort of differentiate between what Saito has done. Obviously, some of the improvements appear to be on the security side of things in terms of the attack. It's still taking me some time to digest the differences, and I get it from a data standpoint, but I'm going to have to probably reread these different blog posts, and I'm interested to hear some of the information that's coming out that you said in a couple of weeks.
You can also you can hit us up on DMs, questions, Saito Telegram. Like, I'm really happy to spend time with anyone and explain how Saito works. It doesn't need to be a chore. Don't hesitate to get in touch.
Absolutely appreciate that, and I would definitely going to be following the project. Fascinated with your guys' conversations, because my biggest issue with the whole space and why I've avoided it is simply because of the longer term economic implications, with most of the networks that were designed. Of course it works today, but the question is whether it's sustainable down the road. And that's honestly, I've yet to see a model outside of the Elron network, which I see as the model that may be sustainable, but maybe missing certain points as well. But Saito appears very interesting as well. So I'm interested to do a deeper dive and try to understand exactly the differences. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to answer the questions.
Oh, thanks, Wesley. We better move on. Is anyone else in the live chat got questions? We have a few in text chat. I'll quickly answer one from Mark DeCourt, where he asks about what kind of partnerships we really need in place to succeed in Mainnet. And I think we have the basis of all of the kinds of partnerships we want there, barring, I think, a really thriving developer community, independent or otherwise, groups, project. And that's a real central focus for us. I think it's quite simple to answer. We need more developers, and we're working very hard at the moment to get things in place to make developing on Saito, as good as it can be.
I'll take the ETA of Mainnet one. There's people bring their language, we've noticed, into Saito Telegram. What we've told people is that we can't go to Mainnet until Saito Rust is done. The specific reason for that is that there are a couple of network settings like the block time, how much of a chain reorg we're going to be able to get away with within 30 seconds, stuff like that, where we want to actually be pushing a ton of transactions through the system before we make final choices on that, because we're expecting that some people are going to try to screw around with the network, especially as we grow. So Saito Rust has to happen for that first. Beyond that, it's not really a question of we flick a switch and we're mainnet. Anyone can deploy an application to the network today. What needs to happen beyond that is we need to be entirely sure that we can guarantee token persistence, which means we have the system for managing the network upgrades. People put money in staking, they withdraw money from staking, whatever, and no one's tokens or coins go away. So what is the ETA for that? I'm not entirely sure. I'll tell you that we'll be working on it after Saito Rust client is out. And the timeline we've given people for that used to be 6 months. It's a lot less now. I guess it's 4.5 or so. And so it really depends on us getting the Rust stuff done, moving on to this. And I think one of the bigger questions also is, are there any much higher priority things that come up in tech that might delay that? And I think that's kind of a marketing and business side, but I think it will be obvious to everyone if there are. If Tesla wants to build on, we might be like, well, we'll punt on. Or maybe we'll say back of the bus, Elon. Richard?
Cool. I agree on that. I think it's also for us, Mainnet is also a community thing. We need a community of people running nodes to be an open public blockchain. That's something you need, and we need to work on that as hard as anything else. And that then comes down to the stuff David was talking about as well, about having a community that can upgrade and keep a chain in sync, make sure that's working for everyone. So those are some coordination issues with the community as much as anything else.
Yeah, there's a question on staking. The answer to that is also, that's the Saito Rust thing. So when people are thinking about mainnet, I think that's basically when staking kicks in. We don't think it's a good idea for anyone to move their tokens off of the ERC20 onto mainnet until we're guaranteeing token persistence. I mean, until we are, if someone wants tokens on the live network to play around with, contact us, we'll give them to you. But don't move them before we're promising you that they'll stay there, is my advice. But yeah, there will be a time you'll be able to stake. It's a bit like mining.
Cool. We've got a question here about Krypton from Ash, and the only issue in answering that question is I'm not actually very familiar with Krypton. So that's a note in the book to look up what's going on there. I'm just checking we haven't missed anyone.
Can you attempt to explain the mining component to how it differentiates?
Sure. If you take a look at, have you guys seen Tenant? Maybe we'll use the Tenant meme example. So this is the meme that it's like the plot of Tenant. We're not sure if anyone understands it, but we're just gonna, boldly go and see. Bitcoin solves two problems. It uses mining to solve a difficulty problem. It's supposed to be difficult to produce blocks. And it's got a fairness of payment problem that it solves by leaning on the difficulty of block production, right? So it pays the people that produce the blocks because that means that the pay is equal to work. And the economic idea is staking, you can replace it. It's the same thing. It's the same model. You solve for difficulty and you use your solution for difficulty to solve for fairness. The reason they need the fairness component is it's a one CPU, one vote. The economic model is that the people that are making money are supposed to pay for the network. This is falling apart in practice. And so people are kind of actually forgetting why we have fees in the first place, because now we've got transaction processors and API and we're paying extra fees for them. So why on earth we're paying for the network is a great question. But the important thing is that those two problems are solved in that order. And one of the problems is, like I just mentioned with economics, another is they're using an external market to solve for difficulty. And because they're using an external market, they don't actually have a difficulty function. They have a cost function. So you have people say things like, you know, the 51% attack is way too expensive because you can't buy 51% of Bitcoin's hash power. Well, you can rent it as soon as 51% of the network wants to make more money colluding in some fashion, or as soon as they can collude without showing their hand in a way that you know, there's a public crisis of confidence, so to speak. And realizing that the difficulty function is an economic function opens one of the real critiques that Saito solves, which is that we're relying on this external market for security. But the external market is always incentivizing collusion and concentration. So, you know, maybe you can't rent, but, you know, someone who already has hash power, they may only need to be able to rent an extra 5%. And also the supply curve of the work function is really what's keeping you safe. So right now with Bitcoin, for instance, the supply curve is pretty steep. And it's super steep because, you know, the block reward is really high. And so there's a lot of money going into research and development, and there's a lot of new miners constantly joining the network. As soon as that supply curve flattens though, and hashing and hash power becomes a commodity, it becomes a lot easier to do certain kinds of economic attacks because you don't have a steep supply curve. One example is renting hash power and then making a lot of blocks and using the payments from the blocks to rent more hash power. So the fundamental problems with Bitcoin come from, first of all, they've got a difficulty function that's really just a cost function. And because there's an economic market involved, there are always situations in which the cost function of attacking is profitable and positive. And then the second is they're giving money to people, but the people that are getting the money actually don't have an incentive to do the things that they're supposed to do, because even though we would all be better off if they did, individually, they're better off not contributing, which is the collective action problem. But there are two problems there. There's cost of attack and there's fairness of payment. And proof of work and proof of stake solve them in this order. By leaning fairness on, we're only going to give the money to the people that are doing the work. And as soon as they stop doing that, as soon as you start getting the Bitcoin Cash approach, or the master nodes, oh, we're going to take 15% and vote on it, or we're going to take 10% and just earmark it to this company, you start opening yourself to economic attacks from the people that have this extra subsidy. Saito solves the problems in the reverse order. This is really hard to see, but if you see it, it's a really powerful way to think about it. What we do is we've got basically a rigged lottery where the people that are collecting transactions from users and getting them to the block producers, they're going to earn disproportionately more in the lottery. And so the people that are producing blocks are playing a rigged game. And if they're honest, they're building blocks using fees that are paid for by other people. And even though they only make 20% of the fees on average, or 10% of the fees on average, it's still profitable for them because 100% of the fees come from honest users. But if you're an attacker, you have to be spending your own money. And as soon as you're spending your own money, you're only making 10% of it back. You've got a real problem. And so in Saito, the solution in terms of the rigged lottery is the first solution, and it's a division of payment. And it's a rigged division of payment where unless you are directly getting the transactions from users, it's going to cost you money to produce the fastest blockchain. And that gives us a cost of attack, and that cost of attack then becomes the difficulty function. So Saito is basically, it's an inverted version of Bitcoin. It solves the exact same problems, but it solves them in the opposite order. And that's why the solution doesn't have the trade-offs that this version does. Those issues go away because majoritarian attacks go away. And the majoritarian attacks exist in Bitcoin because 51% of the work can always buy up to 100% of the profit. And that's not the case if the first problem you solve is making sure you can only get, if your measure of work includes sharing, so you can never get 100%. That might be, I don't know if that's followable, but I have no idea if that makes any sense to you guys.
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, comparing the two helps quite significantly. Obviously, go for it.
Is this, you get Satoshi, right? And the problem is fundamentally with Bitcoin, in order to be trustless, it needs to pay for itself. And the problem people had run into before him is as soon as they need to pay for it, they've got this external money system. And whoever controls that external money system connecting to your new money system is able to control the blockchain. And so Satoshi solved that by moving money into the network. So like one of his visionary insights we can think about it is the blockchain can be money if the blockchain is money, right? Like it can be trustless if it's money. And if it's trustless, it can be trustless if it's money. And if it's trustless, it can be money too. So we kind of sidestepped the problem just by moving money internal to the system that he wants to support. And that gave it the properties that allowed it to be money. Saito does the same thing with this external market for work. We say, if you're relying on an external market for work, you're never going to be secure because the economics are going to screw you over. Because anyone can buy and rent and sell work in this external market, and you have no idea of what they're doing. So one way to think about transaction routing is it's preventing people from buying and selling stuff in this external market. Because, if I want to buy work from you, you have to send it to me. If you send it to me, you're signing it to me. But as soon as you sign it to me, it's worth half as much as I paid for it. And if I use it to make a block, you get paid. So Saito, by moving the difficulty, we basically say, look, you're collecting fees, you're burning hash power. Well, you could just collect money and burn the money. So Saito does the equivalent thing, but it gets rid of this external market. And by getting rid of the external market and moving it into the blockchain, we avoid the problems with the external market. There are a lot of really interesting ways economically and intellectually to think about Saito. Maybe this will help, Wesley, as you're kind of going through things.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helps, David, and appreciate all the color around giving different analogies and examples and comparisons to Bitcoin. It definitely helps understanding those, in terms of the white paper and stuff. It gives me a better insight as to what Saito is doing and how it differentiates.
Cool. Thanks for that, Wesley. Do we have any other questions from the floor? We've been going 3/4 of an hour. We're happy to fill out the meeting time. Okay, we've got a question from Ash around why we patented the routing methodology. I'm happy to take that, David, if you can. I think it can seem odd that a project dedicated to being open has done that, but our primary reason there is to prevent the technique being used by consortia and other chains in a way that can undermine the public network. That the patent allows us to control how third parties, for instance, companies, etc., could make use of the patent to make use of routing work and possibly even use that control to make them fund or support development on the open source network. The Saito only works as a large public open blockchain. That's its entire purpose for the project. And so I think if people sort of see the patent, they can worry about what it's doing there. But it's really essentially defensive from the perspective of the open source project. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, David?
Yeah, I'd say that what is it? It's like 15, 16 years. We've also got a patent on ATR. It's kind of like blockchain rent done properly. 15, 16 years is not going to be anything in terms of what's going to happen. Hopefully it gives us the ability to get people to take Saito seriously, especially as people understand. We can hit a certain level of scale ourselves, but, to get into the petabytes, we're going to need support from companies that have the ability to any medium-sized company could allocate a team that's
I'm going to preemptively make David host because I've had intermittent network issues here. So so that the meeting can continue if I do drop out.
China.
There's a party going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also, the only thing I'd add to that is that, look at where we're coming from. Historically, we're coming from Beijing, China. We're not Chinese. We're really outside of what makes sense for anything like what we're doing to happen. So we need all the advantages that we can get. That being said, like Richard said, we're fully committed to openness. Oh, enterprise projects? No, I mean, what I meant by that is look, we can get the Rust client and we're going to get projections out for you guys reasonably soon. But scaling on one server with 64 cores is one thing. If we're talking about actual petabyte scale, that's like distributed server setups, where maybe instead of one UTXO hash map, you have like 10 UTXO hash maps. Our team is nowhere near big enough to handle this now. Hopefully by the time we get there, we'll be able to, but we would absolutely love for a really smart company to come along and say, oh my God, these guys have got it. We're going to throw a bunch of stuff at them, and in return, if they'll license this for us to do a private network, that would be fantastic. We're not going to do anything that sacrifices the public network. The public network is our focus.
I do think as well, adding to that, the public network will be at enterprise scale. It will be certainly capable of handling the kind of things that corporate networks do. The big question is, what blend of on-chain information do people want in their systems? Because logically, long-term, things will be a mix.
It might also take 15 years for the proof of work people to figure out that their networks are kind of doomed. So, we'll see.
I definitely share in that sentiment. I just question, because in technology, sometimes inferior models in technology obviously get adoption. And then the question is whether or not the market is smart enough to sort of understand the difference.
And or forced to. I think we've got efficiency on our side. It's not like it's a small difference. The architecture inside it does something fundamental that proof of work and proof of stake can't. And that's create business models around actually participating and growing and running the infrastructure part of the network. And to me, that is it's a king hit as the industry grows. And there are questions of timing, but it's when, not if.
Agree. Yeah.
You want to take the advertising question?
Yeah, I think this is a cool one, and there's a lot to say there. I mean, there's a lot that gets sort of turned on its head, I think, when you start having a network that can handle, micropayments, they used to be called, very small payments, and where people are genuinely sovereign or autonomous in what they're doing. So there's all sorts of crazy things that might happen, like there being ad stores where people actually subscribe to an advertiser of their choice and take the lion's share instead of a tiny, tiny fraction like you do when you use an advertiser in Google right now or any of the other available online scenarios. So that's one model where people install an app that follows them around the web, but it's their app and it has an agreement to feed them money for seeing ads in various places. Another model I think is really interesting. It's like permanent, disposable wallet-based browsing, incognito browsing, where you could just create a wallet for the purpose of doing one page or one session and have it funneled a tiny little bit of Saito, but for having an advertisement in the corner, and blow the whole thing away. And there's nothing anyone could do to stop you in that environment. You can earn 2 cents every 15 seconds for staying on the page, and when you stop, you might lose 0.2 Saito. A fraction of a Saito. One day it'll be a Nolan. So there's a huge number of models there. I think the big thing about Saito is it gives developers and customers the space to work out how they want that to work. I installed that browser when I heard about it back in 2016 or something, a Brave browser. I don't have any of those initial BAT, I don't think. And I love the idea. I was always, thought it was a great experiment. But their model is incredibly rigid and essentially requires a full overthrow of the existing system for it to really work for people, and is experimental until then. I think giving people a toolkit to go out there and say, let's reinvent this industry and do better by users is a far more powerful way of actually getting change to happen, because it can happen incrementally and also in ways that we didn't have to plan.
I just say less theoretically. One big question is: do we need the advertising faucet up before we go to mainnet? By mainnet, I mean token persistence. That's a real question. I think Richard's answer is it. Like, BAT is centralized. There's one company. One company. It's like Google AdSense. They lock in at the browser. Richard?
Cool. I'm just checking if we have more questions. Happy to take one from the floor while this longer question here. I think looking at this longer question from Amit Yazdi, one of the things I would say is participating in calls like this, being part of the community, etc., and understanding, learning about understanding Saito. It's a bit like the Bitcoin white paper, and I think for a lot of people, Saito, I hope, feels like Bitcoin in the early days. We're coming to understand what we're trying to achieve and what we're doing, and just talking about that. It can be any piece of this puzzle. I mean, I can imagine it might be daunting to hear David and I talk after years of working together on this, and having talked to some of the best minds in blockchain, and anyone and everyone in between about Saito for years, that obviously we're conversant. But yeah, get to know about Saito, come and play on the arcade, be part of the community, and I think that really is the best thing that people can do. Everything we do, we want to make it infectious, whether it's the ideas or whether it's just having fun in the community, playing games or chatting. So I think that's really the key from my perspective of how people can help from a community perspective. Did we have any other questions in the group?
You want to take this, Richard?
So why is only 1% of the entire tokens offered to the public?
I think that was the IDO.
Yeah, I presume you're referring to the IDO there. That was the IDO sale. So angel and early investors have tokens. They have tokens too. Those will end up in public hands. And over time, things like advertising faucet and other campaigns will be run to release more tokens. There will possibly be future sales, should that make sense. But that was simply the IDO. There's about 25% of tokens allocated to non-project people so far, outside of Treasury. Hope that answers that question.
We've got the tokenomics stock.
Yes,
the IDO is really, it's kind of a marketing exercise the way it works out.
Yeah. So yeah, really the idea with the IDO is, the way I kind of talk to people about it is, it's sort of like walking through town, gathering a crowd together to go to the new donut shop and let everyone know it's there. It does have a purpose. It's fun. It's not the reason for the project. And it did have a wonderful effect for us of introducing a whole lot of new people to the project and getting them involved. And that's helped growing the community generally after that. So
I'll just open up the tokenomics doc myself. Like if people really want to talk about the token breakdown, we can. Yeah, I mean, I think like the core team, it's like 15% or something like that.
Yeah.
In case a lot of you guys don't know, like that's not, none of this is ERC20. We got a lot of people, the IDO, they're like, oh, is there going to be a rug pull? You know, is the team dump? It's like, no, guys.
The team doesn't have any tokens.
Doesn't have any tokens to dump on you. No, we're here for the long term. In terms of the foundation, when you go out and you kind of do when you kind of go out into, okay, we're doing an IDO. People want a bunch of docs and they want like a clearly delineated breakdown of everything. And so a lot of the effort with something like a tokenomics doc is giving people what they want in a way that it also works with what you want to do flexibly. So you've got to say, okay, well, this is what the IDO is. This is how much is available. For the rest, this is roughly how it's going to be broken down. You know, the way we think about it is that like contributors and devs are people that are building code and infrastructure. Strategic partners would be someone like that advertising faucet, where if there was an advertising company that wanted to take responsibility for that, or two of them, we could go to them and say, look, we're happy to make sure you guys get the tokens so that you can distribute, and we'll be monitoring, and that's where that stuff would come from. You know, the rewards is kind of like community stuff. So like we might, you know, giving tokens to people in exchange for playing games or participating when we know how to do it and it makes sense, we might do that. You know, like foundation is just kind of, the idea is at a certain point, we want something that's not just us, that has control over deciding what should we be funding. We haven't made much progress with how that's going to be structured. If we did, we'd be talking about it, and we've been busy, so it hasn't been on the agenda. You know, most people also, interestingly, they don't ask us the big picture questions because they're really concerned about like how much is coming into the market this week or this year or stuff like that. I hope that answers the question, Ash. Like, you know, we're not really even wedded to all of these numbers. You know, we're trying to keep things flexible because we may do something like a bird at some point. You know, our focus is on growing Saito into being, if not the major global public blockchain. So, you know, we'll see. Richard?
Cool. Yep. So getting website and investors. Website is a mid-level priority. Part of the thing for that comes to the next question, which is growing the team. As I said, we got someone in leading marketing, and we're looking at what we would need and what we want in that space. Just want to check. David's frozen for me, so I may have lost connection.
I'm hearing you. It might just be my
okay. Yeah, I'm paranoid about my connection at the moment. So really, that's about building out the team and bandwidth, and sort of kind of reflecting what David was saying. The issue is, in some parts, you know, people want contradictory things from the project. You know, we could have raised a lot more money and gotten a lot more investors or whales in who could then be dumping right now for a quick in and out. Then we might have been, you know, better resource to quickly accelerate and hire a lot of people and be able to waste some of that money. But is that really what's best for the project? So we are ramping up capacity thoughtfully in that way. We don't want to create, you know, a team that burns through the investors' money in, you know, too quick a time. At the same time, we are looking at what's the best way to engage with community, and a website update is definitely going to be part of that, but it's not specifically scheduled yet. Favorite game, David?
I'd say for me, it's more that like Rust on the tech side has become a priority. We're really lucky to have Clay and Steven. Like, you know, we're talking about the efficiency gains. Clay has spent the last couple of days really tweaking out like block serialization, deserialization. Steven's been working on a bunch of stuff too. Yeah, so that's kind of the tech side. While we're busy with that, we're not kind of feeling under pressure to do the web stuff, and it's kind of fallen to marketing. And marketing has had the gate stuff, the Elron stuff came around, and we've got the dot arcade reach out too. So yeah, it's in the works. Hopefully, we'll find someone who's Node we can hire and bring them up. And Richard's gone. Does anyone else have any questions?
No questions, but I just want to, tell you, David, and Richard as well. You can pass the message around just to appreciate all the effort to do and launch this. As it sounds like it's been a long path of, debate over, since the early 2000s. And I really appreciate the whole ethos and openness of the project. And, it's part of what attracted to me was how you guys were explaining the necessity for this type of infrastructure for Web 3.0 in terms of maintaining this openness, decentralized component. And so appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into it, and fascinated to continue to understand the project more, and appreciate all your effort and so forth.
Great. Well, thank you, Wesley. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I guess I can see 3 questions. We'll give you quick answers. I'll share a link. If you want to know what apps are available by default, go into your Saito.io/wallet. You can see a bunch. You can install new ones from the App Store. We're going to have some official community poker on Saito. Some things are happening behind the scenes I don't really want to talk about yet, but maybe in about a month we'll be able to share some news.
Favorite game. My favorite game is Red Imperium, partially because I dream of a life where I have time free to have a good game of Red Imperium.
I'm still a Twilight Struggle man, but Red Imperium is nice, unless you're playing with Duke.
Yeah,
Duke.
So there's people entering the photo place. Cool. I think that's about the hour. So thanks everyone for giving us your time this evening and for being part of this. It's been great fun. Please let us know if you have suggestions, format or otherwise. This was obviously a first run, and we really appreciate everyone's coming in and being part of it tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks everyone.